Hi guys, it's Nicole from the Physio crew. Had a few problems with my videos this morning, but today I'm going to be talking to you all about fractures and how we help to reduce pain in fractures. So as a physio, I see all sorts of fractures. So I see stress fractures, which is where you get an overload and a stress response in the bone that can lead to a fracture. I see shoulder fractures, elbow fractures, patella, the kneecap, hip fractures. There's a lot we can do to prevent hip fractures, so make sure that if you're getting elderly, you're looking at doing your strength training and making sure you're keeping your muscle control. And we often see, hand fractures are or wrist fractures are very, very common. Scaphoid, very common in people who have fallen with an outstretched hand, or often if they've come off their motorbike. We see a lot of people who've come off their motorbikes and also off their mountain bikes. So if you've had a fracture and you're thinking, right, how can I accelerate healing? I've got some bad news for you. You cannot accelerate healing. There is nothing that we know at the moment that accelerates healing. We can facilitate it. We can get all of the right ingredients to the right place, as it were. So we need to make sure that your nutrition is really good. We need to make sure that you're sleeping 8 hours a night. All of these little things you think won't impact it, but they do. We need to make sure that you're not smoking. We know that smoking delays healing, and we need to make sure that, yes, your nutrition is nice and varied and that you're eating nice and regularly. So the sort of things, if we look at wrist fractures, a lot of the time when you have a fracture, they're going to either stabilise it externally, so they're going to put you into a cast, or they'll do what we call an ORIF, which is how they fixate it inside. And what that will be is it will be internally fixated by something like they'll either use screws or plates or pins, depending on the type of fracture and how unstable it was. So when you've got the metalwork in there, they will let you know in hospital whether you're allowed to weight bear on it straight away, depending on whether it is the lower limb or the hand, because we want to begin gently loading the bone because we know that the bone responds. So after that 6-week healing period, we want to just get gentle movement through it. So once we know that their bone has started to set, they'll do that in the fracture clinic to check the x-ray. Then we want to start loading it very, very gently. Now when people eventually come out of their cast, what they are experiencing is not often the pain from the actual fracture. It's actually normally the stiffness from being like that for 6 weeks. And that's why with physio we're like, come and see us early. Not necessarily with a fracture, because obviously we can't do very much if you're in a cast. But when you have an injury, we try and see you as soon as possible, like my chap who had the hip dislocation, because him compared to his twin 6 weeks on from not having moved about, not walked about at all, are two very, very different people. So if we can get early mobility, keep the range of movement and the strength in the joint above and below, there's stuff we can do. For example, if it's a leg fracture, we can often do stuff on the other side. We can do stuff around your core to make sure that you're not losing any of that condition, so that when the leg or the wrist or whatever, when we know that the bone has set, we can then just crack on with the exercises. We haven't got so much muscle loss and muscle wastage. So particularly with wrist, we'll go back to those. Often when people first come out the cast, they'll only be able to move just a little way, and when they're feeling the tightness, all that's happened is it's just the joint capsule and the soft tissue structures around it have just got fixed because they haven't moved for so long. So the reason that you're feeling the pain is not actually often the bone, it's actually just because it's very, very tight. So a huge amount of what we do is going to be looking at, can you get finger to thumb, can you go to the bases, can you grip, what's your extension flexion like, what's your ulnar and radial deviation like, and then we'll be looking at isometric. So we always start with very gentle isometric stuff, and then we'll be looking at giving you a small little weight to go in. And with physio as well, what we can do is we can actually do something called an accessory glide. So that's where we take the joint above and below, and then we can do little wiggles as well when we know that the bone has set nice and neatly, and then normally people are getting back to normal sort of work at around 3 months, depending on the level of fracture, if they're working with tools and things like that. But it is really important that you do your I know I keep going on about it, but do your exercises religiously, because I've seen people who have had hands who have done brilliantly well, and then I've seen other ones which have developed something called CRPS, which is where the brain gets it thinks it's being damaged. So when you touch the skin lightly, you might get like an 8 out of 10 pain in your brain. And there's lots of things that we can do to help that, but we need to spot it early. So if you start noticing that you're getting darkened hair, and that can happen actually with the cast as well. But if you start noting colour changes, or if it looks very swollen to you, if it is very swollen visually as well, there's lots of different things. So we need to just make sure we're weaning for that. And if you have got CRPS, the sort of things that we would be doing is retraining the system to your brain, because the brain is still feeling it as 8 out of 10 pain. There's nothing wrong with your brain as such, but it's misinterpreting it. So we need to help it to, through uses of mirror therapy, through ways that we can trick the brain. And again, when I'm talking about the brain, I'm talking about the subconscious part, not your clever part. If it was your clever part of your brain, your personality, it'd be easier. I'd just say don't feel pain, but it's not quite that simple, I'm afraid. So yeah, those are the things, those are the reasons that we feel pain with fracture. Normally it isn't actually the bone itself. Once you've hit that 6 weeks after, normally the worst of it is actually from immobility. So if we can give you the right exercises to get you moving, yeah, you're going to feel a lot better. All right then guys, have an amazing day. Bye bye.